Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today I'd like to talk about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This movie came out in 1987, stars John Candy and Steve Martin. It's written and directed by John Hughes. John Hughes in the 80s was kind of the guy to go to. He wrote or directed movies such as Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Uncle Buck, The Great Outdoors, and then going into the 90s, Home Alone 1 and 2. He had a hand in writing National Lampoon's Vacation, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Dutch, which, funny enough, like this movie, are only really two major theatrical release comedies that take place during the Thanksgiving holiday. Both movies are about getting home for Thanksgiving. In Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it's about Steve Martin's character, who's in New York on business and has a flight home, and he tells his wife and his kids that he'll be home for Thanksgiving. And going to the airport, he's leaving his business meeting, and I'm going to spoil a little bit. This movie is pretty old, but if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I'll tell you right up front, I highly recommend it before I even rate it. It's just a great movie, especially to watch this time of year. He's late getting out of his business meeting, and he has to get to the airport. His flight leaves very soon, and even one of his co-workers says, "You're never gonna make it. You're never gonna make it." And this is where we see him try to get a cab to get to the airport, and this is where we see Kevin Bacon shows up briefly in this movie, in the beginning of the movie, because they're both fighting to get into a cab. And this is where we're introduced briefly to John Candy's character, Del Griffith. Steve Martin's character ends up taking the bus to the airport. He ends up getting on a plane, and he ends up he gets seated next to Del Griffith, John Candy's character. And right away, these two don't match. It's pretty much the odd couple. Steve Martin's character is more straight-laced, buttoned up, and John Candy's character is more laid back. Likes to tell a lot of jokes and stories from things he's witnessed or experienced. And Steve Martin just wants to be left alone, and John Candy's character just won't shut up. The plane ends up getting diverted from going to Chicago and ends up in Wichita, Kansas, because of a snowstorm. And pretty much the rest of the movie is these two guys get pretty much lumped together, and John Candy's character tries to help Steve Martin get home in time for Thanksgiving. Now, along the way, they have their arguments and disagreements, and a lot of goofy things happen to them both. And there's a great scene at a car rental place in the airport. If you've ever seen the movie, Steve Martin's character gets dropped off in the car rental parking lot, and the car is not there. And the bus takes off before he can get on it, and he has to hike back to the airport to the rental car counter. And when he gets up to the counter, there's one woman behind the counter, and Steve Martin just goes off. And it's said from the time he starts talking till the counter attendant ends the scene, it's 60 seconds, and 18 F-bombs are said during that scene. But it's hilarious, and just the interaction between John Candy and Steve Martin is great. And it's just, at the end of the movie, as the movie progresses, you see Steve Martin realize that Del's actually the friend he never thought he needed. Steve Martin's character comes off as a guy who doesn't have a lot of friends. He's more about his work, and then he spends time with his wife and his kids, but his work takes precedent over everything else. And even towards the end of the movie, he comes to the realization that he's been spending too much time on the road and away from his family. And even though John Candy's character causes him a lot of grief trying to get home, he realizes towards the end of the movie that he likes this man, and he's actually a friend. And so for all the goofy screwball things that happen throughout the movie, at the end of the movie, there's a lot of heart, and you realize a guy comes to the realization that he misses his family and needs to spend more time at home instead of being on the road. Both actors, John Candy and Steve Martin, give great performances. use some character actors pop up here and there throughout. Dylan Baker shows up in the movie in a brief role as this guy's son who picks them up to drive him to the train station in Wichita. His character is very interesting, plays a real redneck guy. So it's a very fun movie. It's perfect for Thanksgiving viewing. Like I said, this and Dutch are the only two major comedy releases that I can think of that are set during the Thanksgiving holiday, all about getting home for Thanksgiving. Whereas for Christmas, there's tons of movies that have to deal with trying to get home for Christmas or trying to fix something that's gone wrong for Christmas. So I highly recommend this movie. I'd give this movie an 8.5 out of 10. It's very funny. There's some heartfelt moments especially towards the end of the movie, as things wrap up, and it's just a fun time. In my mind, it's a classic comedy from the 80s, and it's one that I watch every year for Thanksgiving. So that's it for me. I hope you all have a really happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.